like to call the meeting of the Ped Bike Motor Vehicle Commission order. Quorum is present, and the meeting has been properly noticed. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes of April 24th. Moved by Eric Lewandowski. Do I have a second? Second by Grant Foster. Got his hand up first. Any comments on it? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes. With the request of a staff member and with the Commission's permission, I'd like to take the crossing guard request out of order. It's a yes vote versus getting rid of votes, so it should go fairly fast. Is that is that okay? Okay, coming up, Gretchen. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the public comment. Any public comment? I don't have any. No public comment on things not on the agenda. Okay, sorry about that. And disclosures and recusals? Any? Okay, thank you. I heard a rumor we have one more meeting and that's next month. Then we're done. So. Okay, Gretchen.
So we received a request from the School Traffic Safety Committee to review a potential assignment of a school crossing guard at Ingersoll and Dayton. And we did our study, and according to the criteria, they meet all the minimum requirements, and our recommendation will be to assign a crossing guard at Ingersoll and Dayton.
Are there any questions of Gretchen? Any discussion? I don't think we have any public comment. Any discussion? I'll entertain a motion for approval. Second. Motion by Rebecca Campbell, second by Eric Lewandowski. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. You never had it so easy, did you? Next, under unfinished business, accepting the report by Strand on the Blair Street Corridor Study Report and improving the geometry for the Blair Street, John Nolan, East Wilson, Williamson Street intersection. And we have a presentation from Chris Pedikowski.
Thanks, Mike. So this came before the commission last month. It's accepting the Strand report for the Blair John Nolan corridor study and approving geometry for the Blair and John Nolan and Wilson Williamson intersection. So I'll just kind of go maybe just a brief overview of the intersection itself, very briefly, since we saw it last month. And then I thought the city received a letter from the Marquette Neighborhood Association, which I think was printed out for you today. I got it this morning. And I thought maybe we could go through those items as they kind of relate to a lot of the issues that have been brought forward that are still perhaps unresolved in some minds. So with the intersection itself, we are proposing to more or less keep it in the same geometry that is now, with a number of exceptions. Two of the large exceptions would be adding northbound left turn and southbound left turns to the intersection. Let me zoom in. So that's a new southbound left turn from Blair onto Williamson, a new northbound left turn from John Nolan onto Wilson. The other major change to the intersection would be removing these two driveways with the machinery row that enter into more or less the intersection, and replacing that with a new driveway entrance through the parking lot and over on John Nolan Drive to get that separation from all the intersection movements as well as the pedestrian and bike movements on the path. For ped and bike accommodations, we're proposing a new separated ped and bike path along the stretch here, along the Cap City Trail and along Machinery Row, all the way to the Blount Street intersection, carrying that separated ped and bike, the two different facilities there, adding a new signal at the Blount Street intersection, which would include a bike signal phase to cross at Blount Street, and continue that new path system up to the Cap City Trail. All the while keeping the existing Cap City Trail that exists behind the Gateway Mall here, and on Wilson Street. So those are the significant major changes to the intersection. Along the design process, in consideration with a railroad expert that we hired to take a look at the intersection as well, one of the goals from the alders was to try to create a quiet zone at this intersection. So we took a look at the proposed alternative with a railroad expert, and came up with a couple other minor or a couple other changes. One is the addition of this new island here on the Blair Street section, which would allow us to place a gate and an arm that would block the traffic coming southbound. Another change to the recommended alternative was switching this from this lane here from a through and left to just a left only. And what that would allow us to do is gate this through movement when a train comes by, and allow the two leftbound turns to continue. So that's kind of I guess the intersection in a nutshell. And I think if we kind of go through maybe some of the Marquette neighborhood points in their letter, that might help with some of the issues that still remain at large. One of the items the Marquette Neighborhood Association brought to us was that they believe the design is based on data that's in favor of car movement rather than accurate data for all modes, pedestrian, bike, and motorized. And that the data for ped and bike accommodations was not included. So in the report, we do have a section that kind of shows the base conditions. We did count peds and bikes at that time with this study. There is certainly a lot of ped bike movements, and that's why we have included as much accommodations as we could here. The data itself is, if you look at all the alternatives we took a look at, I would say is probably the least car-centric of them. There was a lot of alternatives that worked in a better level of service for motor vehicles, but we thought that the ped and bike accommodations were not as good with those, so we are recommending that we move forward with the alternative that does indeed have the lower level of service for cars, but we believe can help with pedestrian and bike movement all through the intersection in all directions. Another item that we've talked about throughout the public information process over the past 2 years was these the northbound right turn from John Nolan onto Williamson, and the fact that we have included a pedestrian or a pork chop island here for pedestrians to wait. The Marquette Neighborhood Association advocates they continue to advocate for the elimination of that channelized eastbound right turn and pork chop. The reason that we've think that that's very important is if you look at the traffic data numbers here, the northbound right turn is an extremely heavy movement in both the AM and PM, and in the order of 700 to 900 cars per hour. So when you have if you do not have the pork chop lane and you have just a typical standard intersection, when the northbound movement gets a green, so do the pedestrian and bikes that are trying to cross there. And when they have to cross, then now they are crossing with that 900 number of cars turning right at that intersection, and that's a really big conflict. So what we have proposed here is similar to the one that's out there now. Is you can when the through movement of Wilson and Williamson is going, the pedestrians can safely cross the channelized right turn lane, and then when the northbound and southbound movements are going, the pedestrians and bikes can continue on that north and southbound track without any of those right turn conflicts. The island is notably larger. We proposed even a couple of even larger designs throughout the past 2 years of that island to try to store more peds and bikes. Through the public input process, there was a balance to try to find a happy medium that tried to maximize the amount of parkland that could still be used as parkland. So in the end, we reduced the size of the pork chop a little bit to be amenable to those neighborhood concerns. One of the key things we did add, however, is to try to tabletop that right turn, which would slow down vehicles, and that was one of the major concerns from the neighborhood, is that with the current geometry, some felt that was fairly easy to take at a high speed. So now you can see we've tried to make a more of a right angle turn, not exactly right angle, but certainly a higher angle turn, and then with the addition of the tabletop here, it would help with slowing that cars tremendously. Another point from the M&A letter would be, again, current design continues to be biased towards automobiles over the other modes of transportation, and basically the lengths of the lights as far as allowing the crossings, we definitely think that keeping the crossing times are important for pedestrians and bikes, and are willing to optimize those as time goes on and needs arise. So I think some of the issue maybe whether or not the lights go on all the time, or whether a pedestrian has to push the buttons. That's something that our traffic staff can speak to more, but generally we're keeping on the signal crossing timings for the peak hours, and then the buttons for the rest of the day. So again, certainly willing to continue to work on that even today with the existing conditions to try to if there's places where people can't get themselves across in the allotted time, we can certainly work with that. Another item here from the M&A letter is the issue of the geometry in the machinery row section. This has come up a bunch throughout the 2 years of the study, and what should we do? And there's a lot of options here. We're showing a narrowed median island at the request of some in the neighborhood. I will say the neighborhood is not 100% aligned on this issue of what the geometry should be here. But in the letter, they're proposing more space for green, storm landscaping, and trees, and to try to help with calming effects on traffic. What we showed here with the alternative was a skinnied up median down to 8 feet, and including spaces for enhanced bicycle facilities, buffer between the bicycle facility and the sidewalk, and then a large sidewalk. So we got a 9-foot sidewalk, a 4-foot buffer, a 11-foot bike path, a 5.5-foot another terrace. And then the parking. The parking was a request from some in the neighborhood, but you know, that not everybody is on agreement with that. There was some thought that might help to calm traffic a little bit, to have kind of a Main Street feel to it and add the parking. But certainly, you know, there's a number of options here that could go on. We could, if people didn't want the parking, we could look at, you know, enhancing that median, or perhaps adding a bike lane on this stretch of the street. There's really a number of different options that we could go with in this direction. What we proposed here was kind of something that we thought kind of touched on all the input that we heard. In adding the parking, increasing the space for bikes, separating the bikes from the peds. But again, that does come to the con in that alternative is reducing some of the green space. Another component of the letter is extending the ped and bike path and design, looking at design for the Jennifer Street intersection. At this point, that was kind of out of our scope limits for the project. We would like to, in the future, extend that separated ped and bike facility to Jennifer. I think that makes sense. That, you know, that's kind of a bike and pedestrian gateway off into the neighborhood. So that is something we would like to do in the future. And then lastly, there's just a general increase in stormwater management, and if we're increasing impermeable surfaces, then we're not able to treat the stormwater as well as we could if there was more green spaces. And again, that kind of plays into a lot of the trade-offs of what we want in this area. If we do want parking or enhanced bike facilities, or would we prefer, you know, bigger tree terraces and maybe some stormwater management in the medians. So that was the Marquette neighborhood later.
Could you be specific on, you referenced what other people want to be specific on what they said in item number 4?
Item number 4, yeah.
Instead of
Specific
saying,
what the M&A letter says? Or?
yes, because they represent the neighborhood.
Yes, okay, thank you. While we are pleased with the narrowed median on Williamson to permit more uses on the south and north sides of the street, we would like to see wider terraces and better stormwater planning and better placemaking, i.e. space for trees and landscaping, sidewalk restaurants, rather than narrow terraces and more parking. Wider terraces and narrower lanes would have a traffic calming effect that would impact driver behavior on Williamson Street.
The reason I asked is you talked about what individuals wanted, but you weren't referring very well on that one to
Okay.
the neighborhood.
Sorry about that.
Thank
Yep. So certainly the design has kind of you know, people have asked for larger separated pedestrian facilities. Some people have asked for you know, a larger bike facility. Some people have asked for parking. This is what the letter from the neighborhood said. Thank you. And then another concern that was brought up by the commission last month was the number of lanes on Wilson and Williamson Street, and would we be able to narrow the pedestrian crossings to basically, if we went down to, you know, one lane in each direction, would we be able to narrow the pedestrian crossings significantly? I think the answer to that is we're finding with the truck turning movements that the pedestrian crossings themselves would not be reduced. So we prepared this graphic that I have handed out for you, and you can see with the truck movements onto Wilson from John Nolan and Blair, right in the area where we have the pedestrian crossings, we are not able to shrink those due to those truck turning templates. So that's a little bit of a geometry issue there right at the intersection. Whether or not we could perhaps go down to lanes further away from the intersection, if we could go down to one lane further away. Traffic engineering staff have looked into that a little bit. The numbers, we have, when you get away from the intersection on the west end towards King Street, the traffic modeling suggests that we do need to keep those 2 lanes in each direction over at King Street. As you can see, we feel that we need to keep them here at the intersection as well. The number of lanes that we have, so that's something kind of that we've looked into. Certainly can be debated whether or not other folks feel the same way, but staff recommendation is to keep the number of lanes on East Wilson and Williamson Street, particularly due to just the traffic modeling that we've done on the intersections, but also to try to keep in mind any kind of flexibility for the future with developments that we have. We already have Judge Doyle Square coming online in the next couple of years, which is could add a lot of traffic. A couple other developments that certainly could happen on this corridor, and as you see the developments that have been coming in the city, they're generally raising in floors and adding in demand. So we feel that the two lanes in each direction on at this intersection primarily is important. This is incredibly long report and covers a long area, a lot of area. There's a whole corridor study that we looked into regarding increasing ped and bike access. This intersection is kind of more of the immediate needs because the pavement is in such poor condition that we actually we're hoping to replace the 2 east and west legs next summer. We also in the past month have received word that the Blair and John Nolan portion of the intersection would be in line for receiving federal funds. I haven't got the official letter, but we did get word from email and phone that the state would be participating, and we would get federal funds for those portions. So again, we'd like to try to tackle the intersection as quickly as we can, looking to replace the pavement on the east and west legs next year, and then the intersection would include the new left turn lanes and the relocated driveway hopefully in 2021. So like I said, there's a lot of stuff. There's probably stuff that people want to go over and cover. Those are the things I think that we're kind of still working on, outlying areas, and I guess open up for questions.
Before the questions, we have one member of the public that would like to speak. Yeah. Peter Wolf, 945 Jennifer, and I believe you got a handout from him already. I'm not sure if Alder Skidmore, did he get one?
I put one there.
Okay. Come on up to the microphone. I think Alder Skidmore got one? Yeah, he got one. Yeah, come on up to the microphone.
Yeah, I'm here.
And I should say that he opposes, as what he checked on the box. So, thank you.
I'm here to talk specifically about one aspect of this project, and that is that right turn so many people hate. The sweeping right turn, the channelized right turn, all those different names. And I need to go into a little background before I talk specifically about it. We have an alternative to that, to that channelized right turn that we think is actually a better solution to the problem. But in order to have it make sense, I have to talk a little bit about what our concerns are about the intersection. In most of the talk this time around about that right turn, the arguments are phrased mostly entirely in terms of safety and biped mobility. But other issues that some of us consider extremely important here are preservation of the identity and use of Willie Street as a neighborhood street, and also the survival of Willie Street and the residential streets as historic districts, which they all are. It was these kinds of issues that 9 years ago, 10 years ago, prompted the Marquette and Atwood traffic committees to get together and say what we needed to do to keep our street and the traffic on our street the kind of traffic that we need, the kind of traffic we don't need, and what we need to do about it. And one of the major things that came out of that 10 years ago was the item, quote, change the sweeping right turn from John Nolan Drive to Williamson Street to a right angle intersection with a curved radius appropriate for Willie Street's 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. And that's exactly what we're proposing. And this reflected the fact that both Willie Street and Atwood Avenue were becoming increasingly crowded with through traffic that originated at John Nolan and that intersection. And it's gotten worse since then. I was just down there a couple of times, different times this week, and 3 minutes after rush hour was over, cars were bumper to bumper going east on Willie Street, crawling. And so I'm sure they also had to stop for red lights. And so this is, it's getting worse. And so in order to increase the capacity of John Nolan and the Willie Street corridor, in the late 90s, the third lane.
We'll give you one more minute. One more minute. Okay, thanks.
That third lane was added, and it culminated in that channelized right turn. Now, here's the thing about the whole thing. Eastbound traffic, through traffic on John Nolan has the choice of either taking Blair Street to East Washington Avenue or this channelized right onto Williamson and then onto East Side Drive and various other eastbound streets. And in spite of the efforts to make the Blair Street alternative attractive and efficient, the channelized right offers greater travel speeds and a higher probability of unimpeded travel than the Blair Street intersection. The stop line on the way to Blair Street is only green light 50% of the time, whereas the flying right is green during rush hour 67% of the time, and during non-rush hour 72% of the time. So that is being selected for both during rush hour and during non-rush hour as probably as being a favorite way to go. And that is bad for our neighborhood. Very, very bad.
Mr. Wolf, we're going to have to shut you off now.
I'm sorry?
You've overextended way beyond the 3 minutes, so I'm going to have to shut you off. But does anybody from the commission have any questions of Mr. Wolf?
Yeah, no, I'm finished.
Okay.
But except for this now, I do want to present our alternative. And, you know, the Strand people in the city have spent hours talking to you people about exactly what they're doing. And I'd like to have maybe like enough time to talk about this one thing
I'm gonna
that we
have
It won't take long at all, it's simple.
I'm going to
and
have
so
to ask the commission if they'll allow you to go further. Are there any objections? Okay, there's an objection, so I'm going to have to ask you to, that's it.
Sorry.
I can't allow you any more time because you went about double what you're supposed to talk
I'm
already.
only talking about like 5 minutes.
Well, you're only supposed to have 3.
I know, but I'm trying to present a plan. What's the point of not being able to present a plan when we think we have a better plan and that you should be considering?
Well, there's other, it's not just you, the neighborhood association has made the same comments, so we'll take your comments and their comments into consideration. Okay? Okay, thank you, I'm sorry. Any questions of Mr. Wolf? Okay, thank you. Oh, was that a question or a question of staff? Eric?
Oh, I have a question for Chris.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Now back to questions of staff. Eric? Thank you, Mr. Wolf.
Yeah, Chris, I was looking at the graphic up there, and as a frequent traveler eastbound on Willie Street, I guess on the face of it, I really like the idea of the dual left-hand turn lanes. I'm wondering, though, if the creation of an exclusive left turn lane in what I would count the center, the middle part of the street, would not create some bottlenecking, given that traffic would have to get.
This one?
No, I'm talking about Willie heading west, I guess.
This one?
Nope, the other way.
The other way over there. Up
Yeah,
there.
These
right
two.
there, exactly. Wouldn't that cause some bottlenecking farther up the street for people who are anticipating the need to get over into the right-hand lane going straight? As opposed to
To go
the current
through?
configuration, which I believe gives us the
Yeah,
option.
this does, so our recommended option before we talked to the railroad folks was to have a through right here, a through and left, and a left.
Right.
Which is how it is now.
Right, correct.
That actually works the best for cars. But one of the goals of the study was to try to create this quiet zone with the railroad, so they can't blow the horns as they're, or they can, but they wouldn't as a standard blow the horns as they're crossing the intersection. What that does is we have to gate across the movement and then block anybody from getting out of that movement with a little bit of curb. So you can't have the lefts going through at the same time you're blocking the traffic. So what we were proposing here is this does actually hurt the motor vehicle operations a fair amount, but we're willing to. Staff felt that was important in what we heard from the alders about this quiet zone to create that, and we wouldn't be able to, most likely wouldn't be able to create that quiet zone with the traffic that we have now, the way we have the lanes marked now.
How much of a backup might you anticipate at high traffic times?
I think based on the modeling, it was like an extra 200 to 300 feet, depending on in the PM peak hour or AM peak hour. I can't remember which one it was.
Okay.
AM peak, yeah.
But it wasn't really as bad as you might think.
Oh,
have it the way it is because we believe that, you know.
I
that
come
would
close,
be-
I missed you. Oh, there you are.
The reason we've had it the way it is because it did operate somewhat better, but it wasn't a huge amount better, but we wanted to, you know, get every bit we could out of the intersection. We didn't think it was that bad of a thing to be able to try to fight the railroad quiet zone over. You know, we thought that the quiet zone really trumped it, in our opinion. But like Chris said, we did have to have, did he say it was like a 6-inch little median or?
There's this solid black line is a little 6-inch curb head that basically stops a car from changing their mind, and once they're in this lane, to get over and try to get around the gate. This is a little bit unusual in that we are allowing the left turns, but we do that now. Based on the geometry of the railroad here, those left turns we feel can operate safely, and that does. If we weren't allowed to do those left turns when the railroad came through, that is a big backup.
Correct, and if we weren't allowed to do that during that time, the backup that we would get during train operations, which unfortunately appear more often than I would like to see them in the morning, that it would just be unrecoverable until you're, you know, completely, you know, past 9 o'clock or something.
Well, I applaud the dual left turn lanes, because I know that when I come down that center lane now with the optional straightforward approach versus the mandatory left turn lane now, I always wonder if I'm going to make it across that no man's land over there. So I don't have any problems with that. I was just questioning whether or not we were going to see increased congestion up the street, maybe extending as far as what? Ground Zero or
Yeah, it would be back past Blount Street.
past Blount Street?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Alder Campbell?
Yeah, the last time Mr. Wolf presented this, I believe he presented the same idea to us several months ago. I think you responded by saying it wasn't feasible because of the length of the pedestrian crossing it would cause, and that you really needed that pork chop.
I actually didn't get a
Island.
copy of what he just handed out.
Oh, you don't? I'm just wondering, you know, what your comments are. I recall that being the department's response to that. But could you just comment on that?
Yeah, the primary concern is that number of those right turns is so high. It's, like I said, 700 to 800 to 900 cars in an hour. And for those people to, as you're walking across the intersection, to have that, when you get the walk light, to have all those cars coming around, basically, it's the two can't share the time. So if you're walking across, then those cars can't turn right, or vice versa. If they're turning right, you can't walk through. So what the island does for us really is it's able to separate those two movements and allow a pedestrian to cross during his walk light without having to worry he's going to be clipped from behind from a right turning car. So that's our primary purpose in creating that island.
Comment on this from Brian Smith back there.
But both reasons are valid. It's not just one, it's both things. It would also create a longer, I didn't see this new one, but I've seen past versions, and it did create also a longer pedestrian crossing, which would create, you know, more time for that as well. So, but the biggest safety issue for us, I mean, if you're just thinking about the safety of pedestrians, and I know that, you know, prior to the 1985 build of this intersection where the Pork Chop Island was introduced, some of the comments prior to that thing was that they wanted to improve pedestrian safety. And the federal government has a document called the Collision Reduction Factor Clearinghouse, and they rate different types of treatments and, you know, how much safety benefit that they expect to be achieved by different treatments. And separating out the pedestrian movement with an island like this is according to the feds and their studies of, I'm not sure if it's hundreds or it's quite a lot of different locations, is that the chance of collisions between bicycles or pedestrians and right-turning motor vehicles is about 37%, if I recall correctly. Don't hold me to that exact number, but it is 30-some%.
Brian, while you're on, in the past, the railroad, when it's preempts, you cannot cross Willie Street. You can't not get a pedestrian signal. Has that been taken care of, and are you addressing that issue now in this project?
We do expect to. We have been dealing with the manufacturer of our controllers, and so far they were having some difficulties. It's supposed to be able, there is some functions that are supposed to be able to work, to be able to cycle through pedestrian crossings as well as some, vehicle crossings. At this intersection, we just have the dead dual left turn off from Williamson Street onto John Nolan, as well as the right turning movement from John Nolan onto Williamson Street occurred during the same time as the railroad preemption. We want to be able to, cycle through when pedestrians, put a call to be able to.
Well, that was my point. You push a button down, you'll never.
We're going to
get
try
the walk
everything we
signal.
can to be able to get that.
Okay.
If it is at all possible, we want to do that.
Okay, thank you. Grant.
Chris, could you talk just a little bit about sort of the timeline or the anticipated timeline of the project and sort of I know we've talked in the past about sort of the difference of kind of big picture approval versus some of the kind of fine tuning or enhancements, and just give a better sense of sort of what opportunities there, let's say we approve this tonight, what opportunities are there to do some of the fine tuning?
In general, we're looking to approve the geometry of the intersection, and what I mean by geometry is kind of more big ticket items, like there's the presence of left turn lanes, the number of lanes in each direction, whether or not an area has a bike path alongside of it, or a sidewalk, or both, or neither. Kind of more of those major items. So that's the option before you tonight. And then in the past, we've had approvals of geometry with recommendations that we look into stuff too. So ultimately this project would come back. Probably not to this committee, but the future committee that acts on its behalf when we are approving the final plans and specs. So that's happened just recently with East Johnson Street, as well as the geometry is approved with recommendations to look into something. And but generally, we're trying to get a handle on the big ticket items, because that kind of sets curb grades, it sets where we do our storm sewer, it sets that kind of thing. So little items like, we don't have a big enough, apron to some of these ramps. That's certainly stuff that we can work on in the next few months, depending on which project we're looking at. So let me go to the overview. So what we're hoping to do with this project is we have safety funds to basically cover the Blair Street and John Nolan portions. Now, with safety funds comes lots of reporting, so it takes a little while for us to get all the approvals to get that federal funds established and get that project bid. So we're anticipating this work, the Blair and John Nolan work, to be hopefully 2021 in construction. So we have basically till 2020 to kind of approve those final plans and specs. With the East Wilson leg and the Williamson leg, that pavement is in dire condition, and we are proposing in our budget for next year, if we can get the geometry approved, to go ahead and replace that pavement next year in anticipation of the of the intersection project. So what that would do is replace the pavement in this area here, just west of the railroad tracks, which is the absolute worst, and then would also implement the Williamson legs here and the Blount cycle track. So we're hoping to, like I said, we proposed in our budget to get at that pavement sooner than 2021, as early as 2019. So on those types of items, we have a little less time because we'd be looking to hopefully approve plans and specs around November or so we could get it out to bid in the winter and try to get some good prices on that project.
Thanks, that's helpful. I'll just run through a few comments then, and maybe you can kind of just give a sense if that's something that can be looked at or if it's a game changer. Maybe looking in front of Machinery Row, you get some alternatives drawn up here. I guess I would just say, first of all, I would strongly recommend that we don't use that precious right away for the car parking slots. So I think that's a really...
This one here, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, like I guess the second one on the left is the one without car parking.
Yep.
That still shows the median at 19 feet, so I think there might be another version where you still sort of skinny the median up and use some of that additional space for some other things. One thing I would think about is the sidewalk, is that 9 feet? Does that match up with?
It is
with this
9,
one?
yes. Currently in the proposal, yep.
So I think one thing I heard a lot of folks talk about is that good separation between ped and bike movements through that stretch, and I don't know if we have good numbers on it, but my hunch is that especially during rush hour, the number of people walking and biking there is probably almost as high as is on the Cap City Trail on the other side of Willie Street. It's just a really, really busy stretch. So I think there's a lot of good reason to do that. I think it's going to be really dependent on the final design as to whether it works that way or not. So I'm still a little concerned that if we build that, how many people are still going to walk in the bike lanes, basically, right? And then we've built this 9-foot sidewalk and nobody's using it. So I just think that's going to take some special attention, and maybe adding another, making it a 12-foot sidewalk instead of a 9. I don't know exactly what the right answer is, but I think much better than using it for car parking would be making sure that section really functions well, both for the separation, and then I think in the Marquette neighborhood letter they mentioned, maybe street or cafe or something, and it seems like some of those businesses along in Machinery Row might, benefit from having a couple small tables out there or something. So I think looking at that a little bit more. I don't have a strong preference in terms of the median width, but definitely don't think we should take 8 feet out of the median in green space and turn it into car parking that's not even there today. So I would strongly recommend that. Kind of in that same vein, and I had mentioned once to you, but exploring the option for table topping the crossing at Blount. Again, it's a really important route, especially for bike route. I mean, I think the bike mode share in the Marquette neighborhood is I think it's over 20% in there. And it's a really severe crossing right now, just in terms of the kind of the gutters and how that all works.
This one here.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think especially with, we're going to have a signal in there, it's going to be a very different configuration. And so, I know there's always challenges with stormwater, but finding a way to, raise that across there and really highlight that, I think would also be a big safety improvement for people coming out of the Fauerbach and kind of looking left and turning right, that sort of thing. One other small detail on this same section, where the Fauerbach, you can see where it kind of pinches against the sidewalk there.
Right here.
Yeah, right in there. And I don't know if there's anything that can be squeezed out of the median, or any way we could get even another foot or two there, and perhaps even considering some sort of a retaining wall. Right now, it's a really bad spot in the wintertime especially, but even just from rain events, it always carries dirt and sand, and it kind of pools up on the path there. So kind of taking a look at that. Mm-hmm. And then I guess going back up more towards Blount and Jenny, I know that part is, once you get past Blount, again, it's sort of out of the project scope. But since it's more of a constrained right-of-way there with the turn lane, it looks like you're maybe carrying the bike ped buffer, kind of the same width all the way out to that point. That might be a place it might be worth widening that sidewalk again and maybe shrinking the buffer a little bit, just really to entice people that are walking to, it should look very attractive and obvious that this is the place I can walk and I'm not gonna get buzzed by bikes, I guess is the big point there.
Okay.
In terms of that right turn, I know that's been something that the neighborhood's really talked about a lot, and I definitely get sort of where they're coming from. I also do really understand the safety benefit of separating that, and I think the reality is if you take it out with those volumes, and even if they went down a little bit, let's say some people go to East Washington because they don't want to wait, but you're still going to have more or less that kind of volume, and really people are going to get frustrated, drivers are going to get frustrated, and they're going to take chances, right? And they're going to get tired of waiting if there's a lot of heavy ped crossings, and they're going to just push it, and I don't think it's a good idea to take that separation out. So I am in favor of leaving that. I appreciate the intent to kind of slow the curve a little bit, and I think that raising that ped bike crossing should be a big improvement. So I think that's a really great idea as well. I would say, and I think they mentioned in here, but I really would like to look at the timing between that sort of the green light preference for the ped bike movement across that lane versus the right turn green. And I think there might be something we could do there, not in the geometry, but just through that signal timing that might help the neighborhood. Just sort of help control that throughput a little bit as well. Almost like an on-ramp kind of an effect there, but mostly just to help prioritize the bike and ped crossing, since it is a pretty big journey when you're going across all those legs. The one small thing on the eastbound Wilson, if we could get a bike call button on the left turn lane island as well. So right now, yeah, so there's one there, but we need one on because if you're going down and you're going to take a left, right now you have to go to the right, go over, hit that, and then cross across the front of all the cars that are there to get in.
Here?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that island is too small. You have to stay away from that's actually
crossing.
one of the reasons why we jogged this sidewalk over, is that we had to get the call button far enough away from the railroad. Now maybe it could be over here.
I think that would work fine, because basically if it's a red light, you could pull up, hit it, and then if you want to cross the tracks and wait is fine. But the issue is, and it just doesn't work well, but also you hit it, and then as you're starting to go across the bike box to get in the left lane, if it turns green, you're in a really bad spot. Yep. So being able to activate it, or putting a in-ground activator that works, so you don't even have to push a button, would be great as well. But something to sort of eliminate that issue.
Actually, yeah, we're trying to do more and more detection for pedestrians and bicyclists. So over here, actually, we are experimenting with a couple of different technologies, mainly through regular cameras and also infrared cameras, to detect pedestrians and the bicycles over here. So we're doing that for bicycles right now. It's much more reliable than the in pavement loop detectors that we had before, but still we found that sometimes it's missing the call. But we're actively looking for new products, and also industries getting the message. They're working on it as well. But in between, we can probably look at adding a push button over there if there's enough space. But for long-term solution, I think the city is trying to do more and more detection for bicyclists.
Great. Just two other quick comments. One is where is it? Oh, the Law Park. So I think my understanding is that you're expecting that the parks is going to do some, I think some master planning there, and you want that sort of the question of that design to fall as part of that, which makes sense to me. I would just maybe comment from this commission that I'm not in favor of the current design going through the parking lot the way it's designed with those two curves like that. It seems like it'd be a great opportunity if you could sort of route it around, across where the boat launch is today. I think that may make the boat launch not feasible. So that's probably a question for that kind of planning process, but I would just say from a sort of transportation perspective, if we could keep the bike and ped path around the entire parking lot there, and then cut through with where there aren't cars that are parking or coming out of their park stalls, you know, closer to where the current alignment is, kind of separating the two parking lots, I think would be really favorable. So maybe if you could pass those comments on. And then my last one is about the sort of number of lanes, and I think there's a couple different sections. The one that I guess still feels to me like we'd be putting in concrete without a great reason is the inbound Wilson, just west of Blair. And I think with the newest truck turning template, it looks like those get aligned, just after the crosswalk, which I think you're right. It's not gonna, probably not a huge opportunity to shorten that. I mean, maybe a few feet it could. But if if I sort of imagine all that extra pavement coming out and either going into what I think hopefully going to be a pretty cool kind of triangular people space, right? And I don't know exactly how that's going to get programmed or used, but a nice big green space there, and the potential to carry that for another block or so. I get the need to have some multiple turn lanes up by King Street, but I guess I'm not sure, approving this, how much that would pen us in, but it just feels to me like we're kind of building an extra lane, and I can't quite see the value of in that stretch. So I don't know if that's more of a geometry question that still needs to get talked about, or I guess if you have any other feedback on that part of it.
Yeah, I can kind of jump in, and Yang and Brian jump in as necessary. I think what we're seeing is that we're able to kind of push the gamut here with this single through lane, which goes into 2 lanes. This is we're at a point here where we're adding to the delay a little bit before the intersection. There may be a situation way in the future with growth if there's enough of a need that we might have to go back and trump maybe the lane usage trumps the need for a quiet zone there. I don't know if that would ever happen, but it's possible that we might find ourselves that we need that extra through lane again. We do, based on a look at the modeling, as Brian mentioned, we do think we need the 2 lanes at King Street, where the 1 lane goes up King and the 1 lane goes into Wilson Street beyond to the west. I think our staff recommendation is to try to stay flexible with this design. If the stretch when we build Wilson Street to the west, and if we know at that point that we definitely can go down to either 2 or 3 lanes in that stretch when that project's ready, I think creating that either like a right turn lane onto Franklin Street with this lane, or coming back into the project and modifying the outside curb, we feel is an option as well. So I think staff recommendation at this point is to kind of continue with this geometry to provide for the flexibility. But again, that's just basically our recommendation at this point, and that's what we're here to talk about.
I guess just one thought in response to that, and I don't want to get into a big brawl over this. It's a 2-block section. 2 things I think we need to challenge ourselves on. One is the idea that like bigger, wider concrete is more flexible, and I think it is true in terms of sort of more motor vehicle movement, you know, it opens up more possibilities, and as things change, you can sort of restripe things. So I get the concept of it. For people that are walking, people that are biking, people that are taking buses and getting off and walking, big, wide stretches of concrete that are primarily used for cars, it's not a flexible situation. It's a barrier. So I think we need to just kind of challenge ourselves on that front. You know, just building a lane that we don't have a really compelling reason for. I mean, that extra 10 feet of terrace space would be really welcome in this stretch. It's kind of a concrete jungle there. So I think we just have to push hard there. And then this other kind of idea of preparing for potential future growth, particularly downtown. You know, I feel like we get that we're not gonna be able to accommodate all that growth with motor vehicles moving people around, and I feel like we're pretty committed as a city to focus on transit and biking and walking, and I think that's where we need to put that focus. So if we're going to talk about growth, keeping in an extra car lane just in case more people want to start driving doesn't feel like a real good way to do it, and instead, you know, making these streets as attractive to people to be outside their cars, I think is a better strategy if we're focused on growth. So I'll leave my comments there.
Susan?
A question which I think is relevant, not to the issue of the island for crossing for pedestrians, but when I get off the bus on University near Park Street, right past Park Street, when I go toward the university, there's the sign that says no right turn on a red light. And I'm wondering if something comparable could go on that right turn from John Nolan onto Williamson so that the pedestrians can be safer crossing there.
Brian, do you want to?
It's been that way for quite a long time. It has been that way for a long time.
Technically, it does not say no right turn on red. It says this is the turn signal.
It does.
Was the comment correct about?
I think it does. It doesn't mean
Turning right onto John Nolan. Do you recall that comment?
There's quite a few locations where they have no turn right on red with the pork chops, such as northbound on 51 and then turning right onto East Wash. There's no right turn on red in that pork chop. There's a couple other locations like that too.
So that would affect the amount of time, wouldn't it? Or am I?
I'm sure.
It does.
I'm
If the red is
misunderstanding.
longer, then there's longer time where that they can't turn right. I'm not sure I'm following the question.
Yeah, I guess. Well, Mr. Wilson said that going straight over to East Washington from John Nolan would you could pass a third of the time you could go through, but you could turn onto Williamson from that about 2/3 of the time. So just in terms of people being able to continue moving, they would choose to turn right. So I thought that was relevant to the issue of safety for pedestrian crossing there. If that does make sense still.
I think I'm still having
I don't know how to
having a hard
articulate
time.
my thought.
Oh, the pork chop right now has an obey the signal. Yeah, there's no right turn on red onto Williamson Street. And and it gives the traffic people more options how to handle the green time.
So then I didn't follow his comment, I guess, about the time.
You'd have to, Brian, you got any comments? Oops, missed you again.
I went on to Google Maps, and there is no turn on red, both for the near, the near, and there's also one in the median for the far. So there's two signs that both say no turn on red.
Which location?
For the John Nolan right turn onto Williamson Street.
Yeah, it does, correct, yeah.
I thought that's the one we were talking about. I apologize.
She had named a different one,
Well,
but currently it says no turn on red.
It seems inconsistent. I thought I heard him saying that it was okay to turn.
No, not at that location.
Well, we could, review, whether people is ignoring the sign, though. If that's the case, we do have other tools to address that, like, the blank out LED low light turn signs. When you have a red arrow, we can bring up those low light turn signs in electronic format. We found that has been very helpful. So we could look into that. Yeah, also, want to have a quick comment on Grant's comments. Yeah, thank you, Grant, for a lot of good suggestions. That's a long list, but a lot of good ones. Just want to kind of say a little bit about the two lanes going westbound, west of Blair on Wilson Street. Yeah, so after we sat down and talked, we did look into it, and Brian looked into the model, some of the modeling. So we did found that given existing traffic condition, the traffic backs up frequently to Franklin Street, from King Street with the current two lanes. So there are definitely some congestion issue over there, especially during the AM peak. So I think if we just talking about the truck turning and geometrics, it's possible we can cut down to one lane. But we just have to accept that the backup is going to be much longer for vehicles. We think it probably back up beyond Jonathan Drive. Also, I think we all agree on the development in the future of the city. We should be more multi-modal oriented. We should encourage people taking other mode of transportation and reduce our reliance on single occupancy vehicles. We have been doing that. One example would be in the recent project, at Hill Farms, the Madison Yards project. The traffic engineering has been working with planning and other agencies, Metro Transit, for example. We are setting the city's first transportation management association, which is a governing structure to manage the transportation demand for the site. So they have the assessment authority over all the tenants on site, and they put resources together and redo a lot of transportation management demand, so that reduce their reliance on single occupancy vehicles. But even with that, they are still generating more cars on the street, just a lot less than it could have been. So I think that's something that we should continue doing. The transportation demand management, that should be the future model for the major development projects in the city. But we still expect that there'll be probably a little bit additional traffic generated by the dense development. So just some information for your consideration. Thank you.
Your button's on, Brian. Did you want?
Okay. I was just going to mention that westbound Wilson movement, approaching King Street. It's not just the traffic simulation models. We actually, have witnessed many times, peak periods, like where you get peaks in the peaks where it does go all the way back to Franklin or close to Franklin at times. I've witnessed it myself many mornings.
Okay.
And if we put it down to 1 lane, that would just have to extend further.
I think Grant was referring just to that first block up to Franklin. I'm not sure if it's referring beyond Franklin. So,
Just want to make sure it wasn't just thought that we could just have 1 block, you know, like to Hancock.
yeah,
But we're almost there.
yeah, thank you. Any other? That's it? Any discussion? I'll entertain a motion from someone. It's a dual motion. One is accepting the study, the other is approving the proposed geometry of the intersection. I have a motion from Alder Kimmel on both. Grant, you second? Any further comments? The question I've got on this, does that mean you accept everything, including the parking that you see, or?
Well, I guess.
Or you assume that there's going to be some things subject to change
Yeah, I was
in the next
assuming
couple
that
months?
the comments that I provided were gonna be, I think, at least everything except for the number of lanes is probably in that category if we can look at, and so sort of a, you know, pending final approval kind of concept.
I just wanted to make sure that the staff understood, that's why I asked the question.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay? Okay, good. Any further comment? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Chris. You. Next, we have a stop sign issue, if I recall. And that is Turner signs. We have a presentation from Tom Moore of Traffic.
Let's see. I can pull this up. Okay, so this is the area that we're looking at. It's Turner Avenue between Buckeye Road and Pflaum. And this all started because we received a petition from residents to add stop signs at 3 different intersections along Turner Avenue. And we received this petition right before we sent out surveys asking residents' opinions on installing speed humps on Turner Avenue. And the results of the survey were 33 residents in favor and 32 opposed to speed humps. And for traffic calming, we asked for a 60% approval rate, and that was right around 50%. So we did not move forward with the speed humps, and we wanted to bring this today to discuss possible stop sign locations along Turner Avenue. And the 3 locations that the residents requested were Ruth, Hobb, and Linda Vista. So right now, there are no stops on Turner Avenue from Pflaum to Buckeye. There's the high school that's located to the south. And Metro has 2 routes on Turner. with bus stops at the locations shown here. We collected speed and volume data through hose counts, and that showed that there is a speeding problem on Turner, especially at the south end. And we also analyzed each intersection that already has a stop on the side street, analyzed those for always stops. None of the intersections met the warrants for always stops. So the question is, where do we want to install stop signs along Turner? I think there is a problem around Linda Vista, and it seemed like that was the residents' primary concern. Their biggest concern was that area. So I think it does make sense to do something in that area. One of the issues is that there is very little side street volume, so anytime you add stop signs where people feel they're not needed, that could lead to people running the stop signs. So adding 3 stop signs on Turner is probably not a good idea to do right away all at once, because you also have to look at the parallel streets. The only stops are up here at Alice. So if we add stop signs on Turner, that's most likely going to lead to traffic using a parallel street and just pushing the problem around. So that's pretty much the background. I don't know. I could leave it at that.
Yeah, I should have added that, we performed always stop studies. Really, none of the intersections met the warrant.
Oh, I forgot to mention the crash history. There have only been 2 crashes on Turner in the past 5 years that were police reported, and those were both at Linda Vista. And it looked like they were both due to it being an uncontrolled intersection and drivers on just not yielding. So.
I'm not sure where to start here yet. I've got one person that would like to speak. From the public, I'll have them go first, if you don't mind. It's Marilyn McWilliams, 1004 Linda Vista Road. Supports, wishes to speak. I'm not sure what we're supporting. You're supporting an all-way stop at Turner and Linda Vista? Is that what you're supporting?
Well, I guess I wasn't sure what
I'm not sure what we're for or against on this tonight, but come up and talk. Appreciate hearing from you.
I'm Marilyn McWilliams. I am the one that took up the petition for my neighbors regarding the stop signs on Turner Avenue. First of all, I want to thank everybody for allowing this to even happen. I've lived where I've lived for 20 years. The last 3 years since the new construction of our street, I've been very vigilant out there. I've seen accidents. I've seen screeching of cars. I'm the only one on Turner Avenue that also has flowers in our terrace area. I'm scared to death to be out there because of the speeding of the cars. It's not so much the speeding of the cars as the safety of the neighbors. Us trying to pull out of our parking or our driveways between Linda Vista and Hobb. It has the most houses on there. It also has an incline. So when people are coming up over the hill, going up the hill, that's where a lot of the problem
is coming in. We have the traffic from the school, from La Follette. Everybody says it's an uncontrolled intersection, and people don't get ticketed because it's an uncontrolled intersection at Linda Vista. I've talked with neighbors just recently regarding the speed thing that is on Turner right now. The other day, there was somebody that was going 80 miles an hour down Turner Avenue. We have small children, we have elderly people that live in this neighborhood, and this needs to be about safety. It doesn't need to be about anything else, and I live there. And unfortunately, I couldn't get my 90-year-old neighbors to come because of health reasons, the heat, everything else, to come and speak to. I want to be known as the lady who lives on the corner of Turner and Linda Vista, as the one that is fighting for the safety of her neighbors.
Are there any questions? Okay. Grant.
Did you get the survey for the speed humps? And if you don't mind sharing, were you in support or not support of the speed humps?
I was against them. They have them 2 blocks over on Camden. If you go and sit over there at any time of day, which obviously I don't have anything else to do, but I can sit there and watch the cars. It doesn't matter if there's speed bumps or not, that they go flying over those things. And there's more smaller children down in that area than there is up in my area, but nobody has any concern of safety of anybody.
So if, so you were opposed to the speed humps because you don't think they were effective, or?
Correct.
Okay. Any other reasons why you wouldn't want them installed if they could be demonstrated to be effective?
Knocking on the doors, and I have done this since the last accident that took place at my intersection. Both cars needed to be towed away. The reason that I was very adamant about going out and collecting signatures, there was a 3-year-old child that was in one of those cars unrestrained. And I said something needed to be done.
So that was at the intersection, it was a
Yep.
crash. Thank you.
There you go, Alder.
I have a question for Tom Moore. What's the distance, Tom, between Pflaum and Buckeye?
I am not sure. I'd have to measure that. We can.
Well, while you're doing that, a few comments here. The previous speaker, Ms. McWilliams, mentioned Turner Avenue and saying since construction or reconstruction of the street, I guess it was 4 years ago, Turner Avenue was completely reconstructed and added sidewalks, but also important for this issue, they made the street a lot smoother than from its previous kind of rubble-like condition, which slowed traffic. At the time that this was being discussed, I suggested to traffic engineering to do a pre-post study of speeds on Turner Avenue, both before it's reconstructed and afterwards, because I was sure that speed would be increased because you can. The second reason is both speakers mentioned a hill. That really accelerates speed quite a bit on Turner. People love to speed down a hill. They're going up slowly and then they fly down. And I think that's part of the reason why, and perhaps you could also discuss a little more about your findings on the speed study as well, that they were not normal kind of curve in terms of the frequency of speeding there. A lot of the problem, and as someone who's been up and down that street walking many times, is that it's really adjacent to La Follette High School parking lot. So kids park along Spanham and park along Turner and get in their cars at 3 o'clock, bam, and make that hill, or alternately they come down flying at other times. But the main thing is that this is a hill, and did you find out how long the street is?
Yeah, 4,000, a little bit over 4,000 feet. So.
Yeah, so it's almost a mile long, and it's uninterrupted, and it's not a lot of parking on the street because there's residential parking for most people, so it's just a clean shot. And if somebody has that new F-150 and they just want to kick ass, boy, they can really make it go fast down that street. It is, and I would say the same thing for Spanham, and I hope they get stop signs too at some point. It's something that needs to slow down. I was an advocate of the speed humps, apparently didn't pass public muster on this, but I suggested it first that we attempt to get speed humps because I think they do work, other than odd circumstances here or there. But that not being the case, I think it would be really wise to have them at these intervals at Ruth, and if we can't have them at Hobb, then certainly at Linda Vista, so that people can't get up to 40 miles an hour without decelerating. So those are the main points. Could you discuss a bit about the speed survey that was done?
Yeah, so we collected data in April, a little bit over a month ago, and when we collect data for traffic calming streets to get speed humps, anything that's over, we look at the percent of traffic that's over 30 miles per hour on a 25 mile per hour street, and anything that's over 20% is high. At the southern end of Turner, both between Hobb and Linda Vista and between Linda Vista and Flaum, it was over 30%. 36% of the traffic in this block was over 30. 33% of the traffic in this block was over 30. And there were a few vehicles going between 45 and 55 miles an hour. So, and it did match up with school times. So in the morning, getting to school and leaving school. So very high speeds, basically confirming what the residents see is that there is a problem.
Priscilla, did you want to continue?
Yeah, just if I can, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, these are very high speeds from the most inexperienced drivers in my experience in very big cars. So, I mean, it's kind of a triple whammy. And it, as someone who's walked up and down those streets, canvassing or doing whatever, it's scary. And that affects people's quality of life. Ms. McWilliams mentioned elderly people. This Turner Avenue and Spanham, these particular blocks have an unusually high concentration of people who are quite elderly. And I've heard a lot from them, and this is their main issue concerning their quality of life, is their fear of being out on the street, as you say, especially during school change times. So I really hope the commission agrees with the resident petition for these 3 stop signs. I think it would be a great benefit to the community.
I've got a question on that. On the petition, I thought they had, oh, they crossed off the one. Okay, they've got 3, but one of them was not studied. Okay. Thank you. Alder Campbell.
So, you did the study for 4-way stop, but at Linda Vista, there's not, would it have to be a 4-way stop? Could you just put stop signs on Turner Avenue?
Yeah, it would not have to be a 4-way stop, because none of the intersections would meet the warrant for a 4-way stop. But to put in a 2-way stop, that's something that we would just do.
So that would be the case for Linda Vista and Ruth.
Well, Ruth right now has yields.
Oh, they have yields.
So,
And then there's stops on Alice right after Ruth.
stops on Alice, not on Turner.
Oh, not
Yep.
on. Oh,
So right now, there is nothing stopping vehicles on Turner between Pflaum and Buckeye. It's unrestricted.
so I'm leaning towards recommending the 2-way stops on Turner at Linda Vista and on Turner at Ruth. Would that, I mean, I heard you both say that you just run the risk of people blowing them because they don't see the need for them. But it would provide, not everyone would do that, and it would provide an opportunity for MPD to do enforcement if need be, yeah?
Right. And the other thing that is a part of this is the Metro bus stop. So anytime we stop Metro, it slows them down, which is, I know, always one of their issues is meeting their transfer point times. So,
Well, they're already stopping at Ruth.
yep.
They're stopping before the intersection at Linda Vista, but that, I'm on TPC and I know all about that, and I'm not concerned about that. I'm not concerned about that with it. I mean, yeah.
Rick, can you flip them around so that they're not on the cross street, but that they're on Turner?
Ying, did you wanna, that's something that we could,
Yeah, in my opinion, if we are going to, install stop signs, even though they didn't meet warrant, considering, some of the side streets are kind of, dead-end streets, kind of teased with other streets very soon. So, for example, Ruth, has yield signs on Ruth right now, and has it's not controlled on Turner right now. So, if we want to install stop signs on Turner, because we're trying to control, I'll recommend to change the yield signs on Ruth to stop signs as well.
Yeah.
So, I need the make a little bit more sense to folks driving down the street. But from our professional opinion is that we really hope the speed humps would work for the neighbors, but we know that didn't, the survey didn't pass the neighbors' approval. We do think it works, especially for high speed. It's really hard to reduce the speed, for example, from let's say from 28 to 25 miles per hour, but it does a really good job reducing speed from 45 to 30. So that we think that's the best approach. We do have concerns about putting stop sign up when they're not warranted. It's true that people can drive over the speed humps pretty quickly, but it'd be very uncomfortable for them. They probably never do that again. But they can run a stop sign at a very high speed with no impact to them. So that may put people in danger who expect driver to stop at a stop sign, including pedestrians. Right. So we do have concerns about it, but we do understand that the neighborhood does not want to wish to proceed with speed humps. They would like to pursue the stop signs.
Grant?
I think this might be interesting to take up maybe by the future TPPB, but I think it's interesting that we have a process that allows for neighborhoods to request traffic calming, and so we use that threshold with the survey, but I don't think that restricts our ability to put in speed humps as a city, right? I don't think we're actually required in any way to get approval, but rather if a resident or a neighborhood wants to initiate soliciting that from the city, then that's sort of a marker that we've used to say, is the local neighborhood in support of that traffic calming measure, the speed humps, or not? And if yes, we may proceed, we may not if we don't have funds or whatever, right? But I think we might want to rethink, okay, well, speed humps, we have to get, we're dependent on residents to vote in favor. If they don't, we'll put in stop signs. If I'm hearing traffic engineering saying we think that speed humps might be more effective or might have, the most positive with the least negative, to me it seems like we should be thinking about, if, in this case, stop signs are a traffic calming measure, right? We're talking about them not really to for any other reason, but to slow down traffic. And so I think that we should have some standards about the different kinds of traffic calming that we might put in place, and we might want to reconsider this idea that speed humps only get put in if we get 60%, and if we only hit 55%, we don't, and then we'll put in stop signs even though we don't think they're as effective. So I don't think that's going to help us with this case, and so seeing as the survey's already gone out and we're getting asked about stop signs, and it sounds like you guys are maybe sort of semi-reluctantly okay to put them in, I would support them going in, but I think it's maybe something for us to think a little bit more, and maybe we can refine this process a little bit more in the future. The other thing I just want to point out is, it's sort of unfortunate because we just redid this road, and it's sort of going to that concept of, most flexible. These residential streets, especially the ones that don't have much on-street car parking, we're really overbuilding them. We're building them for car parking on both sides, and either never happens or it happens, twice a year. And the result is these super wide streets, and the best, most calm streets we have are the ones that are super, super narrow. And so the fact that we kind of rebuilt it as is, when almost everybody's parking in their driveway, you can go up and down on the street view and, there's no cars parked there. That's a big part of what's driving this, right? So then we have to come back and put speed humps or stop signs or something else, and I think we really need to rethink when we're reconstructing these, skinny them up. Let's just have parking on one side of the street, and that would go a long way to helping these things out. I would actually encourage you to even look at at K Street. You can go in the Google Street View, and you can kind of toggle back and forth between the new and the old, and it's really actually impressive that in the new schema with the sidewalks and the curb and gutter, it definitely sort of widens the expanse, and just visually it looks wider, and I can see why people would drive faster than the old school, even if maybe the road width is exactly the same. I don't know, maybe it was widened, but it looks much wider, right? Once you put the sidewalks in, you put the curb and gutter, and it just looks like, as a driver, you're flying down there. So
We're sort of dealing with what we can't change on this one, is what you're talking about, but it's great ideas, but it's something we cannot change. We have to live with what's on the street right now. But I like your ideas, so. I was just trying to move on a little bit. No, I'm not, I'm sorry. But you're right on, Aaron.
So, yeah, and actually, originally I was going to ask about traffic circles, but I realized since it is a metro route, that wouldn't probably work. But I was going to ask, I know in my former neighborhood, we put in some bump outs on Proudfoot Street. I don't know how effective they were, but they do sort of narrow up the street at some points. I don't know, would that be a consideration for this area, in addition to maybe some stop signs to sort of at least kind of act as a little bit of a traffic control?
Yeah, bump outs help more with the pedestrian crossing. It minimally slows. I don't think they would be
Very
too
effective.
effective in this case with the type of drivers that are out there.
Sure.
And whenever we do bump outs, we get into the issue of storm sewer and having to adjust where the inlets are, and it
Yeah,
becomes
sure.
pretty expensive. So.
Okay, and just another question with regard to speed humps. You know, I'm thinking that I remember Metro being sort of opposed to those on their routes. Would that be the case in this situation, or were they okay if the neighborhood would have been supportive to have those speed humps on Turner?
It affects their vehicles because the shock absorbers
Yeah.
have to.
Staff, do you have an answer for
Yeah,
that?
they do. Metro is, in general, opposed to a lot of speed humps. That really slows them down because they have to slow down more than the average vehicle because of the longer wheelbase. They have to get down below like 10 miles an hour so it doesn't do any damage to the buses. But we usually kind of work out with them. You know, we won't put so many speed humps. We'll try to, lower the number on routes where they have a lot of routes. So,
Okay.
You're right. They would prefer to not have speed humps.
Yeah, they do have concerns, but typically we can work it out with them. But fire departments typically will have more concerns if the route that are used very frequently. So, for those routes, we'll try to avoid speed humps.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Alder Kimball had a suggestion on where she wanted to head, which sounded pretty good. My only comment was maybe have engineering or traffic engineering determine which two locations in consultation with the Alder. It may end up being the same two. Are you interested in doing something like that, Alder? Hello?
Oh, me, I thought you were talking about that.
No, Kimball. I said Kimball. Yeah.
So I'm looking at the study.
Well, instead of us trying to engineer tonight, I like your thought, but instead of dictating which two, have traffic engineering determine those two in consultation with the Alder? Would something like that work?
I mean, we already heard from them that it's really the fastest by Linda Vista, so
Yeah.
that definitely makes sense to have one there. And then just breaking up that.
Okay.
The rest of the expanse, I'm just explaining my thinking.
Yeah.
The rest of the expanse, having it at Ruth Street. On the other side of the hill. I don't know, but I'm amenable to that.
It'll probably come out the same way you suggested.
Or maybe not, so.
Or maybe
but,
not.
Yeah.
I think if Alder
Sounds good.
Aaron's had his way, it would come out the way you suggested. But I wanted to give traffic engineering a little flexibility on looking at the process.
So I guess my motion would be to add two stop signs on Turner where they would have the most impact for slowing down traffic, and let traffic engineering figure out the details.
Second.
Who was second to that?
Grant.
Okay, Grant. And then I think traffic heard that they'll have to talk to Alder Aaron's about those locations too. So, any further comment? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And thank you, Mrs. McWilliams, thank you for being here too. Next we have adopting the City of Madison Comprehensive Plan. Ben Zellers is going to come up and Give us a brief discussion.
As brief as you want it to be. Okay, so as was mentioned, my name is Ben Zillers. I'm from the Planning Department. We are making our way through the 18 boards, committees, and commissions that the Common Council referred the comprehensive plan to after its introduction in May, early May. We're about 3/4 of the way through making those rounds. And so I'll be taking you through just some kind of a brief introduction in this PowerPoint presentation of the strategies and actions that most relate to the purview of this committee. Certainly welcome other comments and discussion, but the plan obviously is a very big document, so just wanted to focus on the things that this committee touches on the most in your work. So just by a brief way of introduction, comprehensive plan has 6 elements. Those being land use and transportation, neighborhoods and housing, economy and opportunity, culture and character, effective government, and green and resilient. Obviously, for the purposes of this committee, really most strategies and actions would focus on the land use and transportation element, but can have other implications and other elements as well. Within those 6 elements, we have 12 goals, 50 strategies, and 167 actions right now. And that is a pretty substantial reduction from the current 2006 comprehensive plan. You got the document in advance, electronic version. Obviously still pretty substantial. We have 160, 70 pages, I believe, right now, but our previous 2006 plan had come in 2 volumes, 2-inch binders, and had almost 1,000 goals, actions, and strategies. So we're trying to make this plan more manageable, more usable, easier for both staff, public, and alders to refer to in kind of day-to-day, month-to-month, and then, I guess, year-to-year decision-making. We did try to, throughout the process of drafting this comprehensive plan and throughout the public engagement process, try to look at goals, strategies, and actions through 4 specific lenses, those being equity, sustainability, health, and adaptability. And we didn't want to have specific elements relating to these because we felt that these are topics that really touch on a variety of different things that are throughout the rest of the elements. For example, sustainability has implications for transit, has implications for land use, implications for stormwater management. So those were all things that we wanted to make sure were reflected in those elements instead of having a standalone sustainability element. Public engagement was a very important piece, really the main piece of Imagine Madison throughout really the first year to year and a half of the comprehensive planning process. Through the various methods of outreach, we reached 15,000 plus people with the Imagine Madison process. Around 2/3 of those, perhaps slightly more, was through the website. The website, though, was not just simply a forum for posting information, but also had a substantial amount of interaction through some web modules that were introduced at the same time. We did community outreach through the community meetings. And in those community meetings, we had 10 meetings at different locations throughout the city, throughout the process. We had resident panels where we had outreach to populations that had not traditionally been participating in planning processes in the past for the city. We partnered with community organizations and nonprofits to engage residents that, as I said, had not normally been participating in kind of the standard planning outreach activities. Also visited 19 festivals and events, mainly throughout the summer of 2017. Had a social media presence on Facebook and Twitter. Had planning pop-ins to 60 different events, and these were various different things like Cap Times Talk, UW-Madison classes, visits to various neighborhood associations throughout the process, and engaged almost 2,000 attendees through those methods. Then interagency staff team, this is a plan for the whole city for various departments. So we had 23 staff members representing 17 different departments throughout this process to make sure we were reflecting concerns and input from all the city departments. Had neighborhood resource team meetings. NRTs are city staff teams and community members that focus on implementing things within some of the challenged neighborhoods within the city. City committees, as I mentioned, visiting various committees and have been visiting committees throughout the planning process. So something that we're talking about throughout most of the boards, committees, and commissions, because it really touches on and influences much of the plan, regardless of the specific purview of the board, committee, or commission, is the growth framework section in the comprehensive plan. And that most closely relates to strategy number 5 in land use and transportation, which is to concentrate the highest intensity development along transit corridors, downtown, and at activity centers. So that really flows into the growth priority mapping that was done in that chapter, where we went through and really mapped growth priority areas, looking first at activity centers, and we mapped established centers. Those are centers where there's already mixed-use development. Then also mapping transitioning centers. Those are areas with substantial opportunity for mixed-use development that might be really more focused on one type of development now. For example, we have a dot around West Town Mall, obviously very commercial and retail focused right now. And then we also have future centers, and so these are areas planned for future mixed-use development that have not yet been developed, but are on the periphery of the city and are anticipated to really serve those developing neighborhoods as they continue to develop. Then within those, we also have regional corridors and community corridors. Those are corridors that right now have commercial development along them, a substantial amount of commercial development that have opportunities for mixed-use development really along that corridor in areas that right now have substantial transit service or are planned for substantial transit service in the future. And then we have peripheral growth areas as well, and this is an acknowledgement certainly that while we want to encourage a lot of redevelopment in these other activity centers, that there will still continue to be peripheral growth for the city of Madison, as has been the long-range plan for the city for decades in the past, and as it continues on in the comprehensive plan here. So really wanted to kind of introduce you to that framework because it does kind of reflect some of the other strategies and actions that are described within the plan. So with that, I just want to touch on some strategies and actions that are most relevant to this committee. First one being land use and transportation strategy number 8. This might be kind of the primary strategy and series of actions for this committee. That being to expand and improve the city's pedestrian and bicycle networks to enable safe and convenient active transportation. Actions to go with that strategy are to proactively fill in gaps in the ped and bike network, continue to integrate pedestrian and bicycle safety improvements and amenities into new and reconstructed streets, update the subdivision ordinance to ensure that new developments incorporate the city's planned shared use path network, and to maintain a system-wide pedestrian and bicycle plan that advocates for implementation of modern design principles while also moving towards a financially sustainable maintenance program. Kind of a mouthful on that one, with text to go with in the plan itself. And so with that, we obviously have a few accompanying maps, one being bicycle facilities, the other one being Tier 1 sidewalks. Definition of that is within the plan. These were essentially just pulled from the Madison Motion Transportation Master Plan because these are substantial strategies and actions within the comprehensive plan as well. We have some additional strategies and actions that relate to this committee's purview as well. One of them being to ensure all populations benefit from the city's transportation investments. This is kind of an acknowledgement that sometimes that engagement and actions as a result of that engagement really sometimes focuses on neighborhoods that are able to speak up the most or are most familiar with the city's methods for engagement or soliciting feedback on projects. And so I want to perhaps try to be a little bit more proactive in the future on proposing certain things for neighborhoods and areas that might not be as familiar with the ways to reach out and engage city staff and alders and the way that happens right now. Another strategy is under neighborhoods and housing to create complete neighborhoods across the city where residents have access to transportation options and resources needed for daily living. Action that most relates to that for this committee's purposes is to ensure that existing and future neighborhoods are well served by transit routes, shared use paths, and sidewalks. So also just wanted to briefly touch on kind of the adoption process for the plan. So as I mentioned before, Council had referred the plan adoption for comments from boards, committees, and commissions. We are compiling those for Plan Commission review that will actually be starting next week. The Plan Commission has a public hearing next week and then has a series of work sessions after the public hearing to continue discussing comments from the public and from boards, committees, and commissions. After the Plan Commission is finished kind of digesting those comments and making their own recommendations based on those comments, they will make a recommendation to the City Council that will then review the plan for potential adoption. We're hoping that the Council will be able to take up the plan to consider it at the end of July or perhaps in August, but obviously that's subject to how they want to handle all the comments that we're getting and that I assume will continue to be forthcoming. So with that, I'd like to kind of turn it over to the committee. I'm hoping that we'll be able to focus on content and policy items. We are aware that there's some typos and corrections that need to be made, and we will be making those. But want to hear back from you, thoughts on policy and content. Hoping that you're able to include any final suggested edits in a motion to recommend adoption of the plan. We're hoping to do that to kind of keep things more formal and try to avoid confusion and some situations where one person makes a comment and then perhaps the rest of the commission may or may not disagree with that comment. As I mentioned, the Plan Commission will review comments. Council will ultimately consider edits during their adoption deliberations. So turn it over to the chair for continued discussion recommendations.
So, thanks, Ben.
Yes, okay. Now I turned you off. Okay. Got you.
This is my 5th time seeing this, and I'm going to reiterate my main point I made at TPC, which was one of those commissions that did not make a formal motion.
Yes. So yeah, we're trying to steer people in that direction, but it doesn't always happen.
But at Economic Development Committee, I see in our handouts there's no notes from that, but we did make several formal motions. And one of them, if you could go back to the growth priorities areas map, it's something you've heard before, but this commission hasn't heard before. So it was curious to me that
there we go.
The main 3 of the regional corridors are coterminous with BRT routes that are also in this plan. But the 4th BRT route that is going to the north side is not considered a community corridor. And I understand that the corridors are all about potential for mixed-use development, but I am going to argue that north side, the North Sherman and Packers, because of the character of those neighborhoods, there is huge potential for commercial development on Packers and for potentially mixed use at Packers and Aberg, and then again for mixed use up at Northport and Sherman. And at economic development, we looked at DOT WISDOT traffic counts. Packers has more traffic, more vehicle traffic on it. It has something like 28,000 vehicles a day, more than Mineral Point or University Avenue or Park Street, I think. So just in terms of, like, the comprehensive plan is a plan for the future. We already know there's going to be massive future redevelopment, 77 acres at Oscar Mayer. There's a lot of potential along Packers, but it's not going to be mixed use, right? So I think you're conceiving of the corridor in terms of mixed use really stopped you from naming either Sherman or Packers a corridor, but it really needs to be called out as a corridor. And I would say at economic development, we decided that Packers should be called that because BRT, you know, the plans are there, but it hasn't really been decided. It's debatable whether that bus should go on North Sherman or Packers still. So I am going to make a motion that, and it's a regional corridor too, because it's, you know, it's basically the gateway to the northern suburbs as well. And potential for, again, getting back to BRT, for, you know, park and rides, and that one place that there is future plans for mixed use at Sherman and Northport, I think warrants naming Packers as a regional corridor. So I'm going to make a motion that it be amended to name Packers a regional corridor. Thanks. So I don't know if any other commissioners have any thoughts.
Are we going to take each one individually, and it's good.
I think we should take each one individually so we can discuss.
Did I get a second on that?
Yeah, Susan.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Okay, thank you. A motion for Packers to be a regional corridor to better match up with the BRT lines.
Just one question with that. Whitney Way is also a BRT route for a portion of Whitney Way. Is that something where you would like to see that shown as a corridor due to the BRT as well?
No, because it's the combo on the north side.
I'm sorry, I lost you again.
On the north side, it's the combination of BRT and like actual massive redevelopment going to happen, right? Okay. At Oscar Mayer and likely along Packers. So Whitney Way, there's no massive redevelopment planned for there. And potentially at Oscar Mayer, there could be a portion of that is mixed use. We don't know yet. Now, we can always, we'll have to amend the comprehensive plan when we do a special area plan for that site anyway, but I think, this is a political document, and I'm a representative for the north side, a political representative for the north side, and I feel that it's because of the character of the neighborhoods in between Sherman and Packers, right? They're single-family homes. And on the other side of Sherman, there are, I would say Brentwood, there is a potential for mixed-use redevelopment there, too. Although, land tenure is just so scattered. There's like 60-something landlords of multifamily buildings there. But there is, potential for that really to be transformed and a social need for that. Anyway, I'm getting away from myself. So there's the residences, and then there's the Packers corridor with potential for redevelopment for employment sites. And people still, just because the employment and or commercial isn't together in the same building with the residential, we can't call it mixed use, but it is so close to the residential neighborhoods, unlike other employment sites or industrial areas. I think it really could be called a corridor for that reason also. So it's kind of mixed use, but it's not together in the same building. Do you see what I'm saying?
Do you have limits on where you just where you want it to be from, like up to Northport, or
yeah,
and how far?
Yeah, or up to Northport. I mean, it can be a straight line.
I'm sorry, was the motion to show a corridor for North Sherman or for Packers?
For Packers.
For Packers, okay.
Up to about Northport?
Or maybe around to Sherman,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay, just general concept, let's leave it at
around
that.
to Sherman, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an arrow, but around, up to Northport and around to Sherman.
And Susan, I missed you. You had a comment?
Yeah, semi-facetious. It's not only May all year round in Madison, and from what I looked in particular at the transportation land use chapter, page 21 had the one picture that had snow in it. The rest had blue skies and, you know.
Yes. Would you like to see more photos with snow in
I'd
them?
like to see a little more variety of what Madison really is
Okay.
like.
That's a little side comment. We're working on a motion right now, but good comment. Any other comment on the motion by Alder Kemmel? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes. Thank you. Any other, no, oops. And
Thank you. On strategy 8, expand and improve the city's bike networks to enable safe and convenient active transportation. So I think I know this is sort of the big, long-term plan, but I think I always like to try and push us a little bit to have as specific and actionable, or specific actions as possible. On D, it says maintain a system-wide pedestrian and bicycle plan that advocates for blah, 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 blah. From my understanding, we don't have a bicycle plan. So is this meaning to create one, or it sounds like maintaining it as if we did. But, so I was with the MPO bike plan, which, sort of exists. And I remember, being on that committee and talking about a need and a desire to get some specific things in the plan, and the guidance from the MPO team was that, they didn't want to put any Madison-specific things in there. It was really an MPO plan, sort of high-level regional, and they would leave up to Madison. During the Madison Motion Sustainable Master Transportation Plan, Dave Trowbridge mentioned several times, this is not a bike plan. That's, some of the level of detail we were looking for was sort of that, we need to have a bike plan. So I guess I'm just sort of a question and or a recommendation, I guess, depending on your answer. But I think we do need a bike plan. I think we need to have something very specific. And, I'm not finding in any of these actions anything that I would understand to sort of get us there.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps the phrasing of that action could be changed to say something like undertake and maintain, or just undertake a system-wide, something like that.
So I guess I would move then a recommendation to change that to adopt, or create and adopt, develop and adopt and I think they're two separate plans. So a pedestrian and improvement plan and a bicycle plan. Period.
There was bicycle, but may already be 10 years old.
No, I think you're probably thinking about the MPO bike plan,
No,
but.
the pedestrian plan's 20 years old. The city of Madison had a pedestrian plan.
there's a bike plan that was done way before I retired, and it's never been updated. I mean, a pedestrian plan has never been updated.
So now, I guess, maybe I'll just leave it there first if I get a second.
So you want, how do you want to update each plan? The bike and the ped plans? And then, or?
I guess you guys are confident that there is one, so you're saying updated, but I guess, and from my perspective, I think we are probably, if it's been over 20 years, we probably just need to create one, so I don't think it's going to do anybody.
What page is that on? Is that
41.
141 or 140?
41.
Yeah.
41, that's where the text of the.
Strategy 8, Action D.
Right.
On page
Okay.
41.
I thought page 114.
And then even
Well, there's a summary chart of all the
It
strategies
depends
and
which I'm
actions.
looking at, yeah. Okay, got it. And we have a second on that?
And then obviously the sort of the text that goes along with that too, it's sort of a little odd. I mean, almost half of it is talking about like some of the winter maintenance stuff and about the trade-offs of plowing arterials versus secondary, which, I mean, I don't know, it just doesn't, it seems a little bit out of scale with that action. So maybe if that's getting updated, we could update the text along with it.
We
then.
can shift some things around and revise that to go with revised language.
Great.
It's all part of the,
He's taking good notes, I feel confident.
okay, any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Any other comments? Going once. No other comments. Darn. With that, I don't think we have to have a final resolution, do we?
Well, there, I think, would be an overall,
Okay,
hopefully,
overall
recommendation.
approval with those approved changes.
I would move the recommendation for adoption of the
Okay, okay, do we have a second? I missed a second.
It's about 3 people, the whole committee.
Pick one. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much, Ben.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
It's nice to see a document where you get down to the little detail instead of giving up in frustration, like. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Next, we have update on the staff response to the bicycle facilities maintenance policy work group recommendations. Young Tao, give us an update on that.
Yeah, so this one should be pretty quick. So at our last meeting, so traffic engineering was asked by this commission to work with different city agencies on the staff response to the work group recommendations for the winter maintenance on bicycle facilities in the city. So we met with city engineering, streets division, and also parks division on that. So just quick update on that. So Kathy Karan from city engineering is leading the city staff team, reviewing the recommendations and trying to put a response together. One of the kind of discussion come up is that this will impact the budgets for a lot of these agencies. So they're thinking about maybe do some pilot projects to figure out the cost for improving the bike facility maintenance in the winter. And they hope to put together a response by September 1st, and then report back to either this committee or other committees kind of follows this one. So that's a quick update on the status.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, that sounds good. Just one question, and I don't actually know the timing on all the budget stuff. Maybe somebody could help me out. If I'm thinking back to all the recommendations, the one that I'm not sure sort of what a pilot would tell us, and I just wonder if there's not an opportunity to get a number in time for consideration for budget, would be the plowing of the arterials on the weekend. So it seems to me like that would be, it's something that is going to have to just be calculated, right? Like today we maintain it Monday through Friday. What would it cost to maintain the arterials on Saturday and Sunday? Like, so maybe if you could just bring that back and see if, as part of the response, if we could get even just a rough number of what would that budget impact be, and at least it could potentially be part of the budget deliberations as we're going in, rather than waiting another full year and a half to do that. And I think some of the other ones probably lend themselves to sort of some pilot projects, and I think that kind of makes sense. But maybe on that one, if we could just work to get some idea of what we think, or what staff thinks the cost might be.
Sure, yeah, I will bring it to them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you. Next, we have engineering updates, RFPs for future projects. Chris Pedikowski. still have a quorum, you can go.
Okay, this should be a fairly quick one. So we have a couple updates this month with, excuse me, with some future potential bike projects. We put together a series of resolutions which would kind of authorize the city to enter or to issue RFPs for future ped bike projects, and I'll go through those pretty quickly. I think most of these were in the TIP presentation a couple months ago. So the first one is what we're calling the Garver Path. That is basically starting from the Cap City Trail near the Garver site or Olbert Gardens, with a new path along the Starkweather Creek, a new proposed ped bike overpass, and then continuing that path up to Milwaukee Street, hopefully incorporating some kind of a boardwalk structure over the wetlands in the Obie Sherry Park. And also with that project, we'd look to replace the Ivy Street Bridge as well.
Excellent. Could you go back on that one a minute?
Yeah.
I had a question. You show the path going over to Fair Oaks also?
Well, that's right now, actually, we're kind of wondering about that connection. I think that'd be part of the public information process, but this project, actually, we applied for federal TAP funds for, and it's looking like, if everything goes well, that we would get approved for that with the MPO. And this piece here was not included in that application.
Yes, I was just curious. I see that as part of a bigger project going all the way over to the Starkweather Path on the other side of the railroad tracks.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Okay. Grant.
And I don't mean to get in the weeds, if you're just looking for RFP, but when you do that alignment, there's a pretty clear desire line right now for the current Obie Sherry path, where there's like a triangle cut out where everybody rides
This one
the bike.
here? Yeah.
Well, it's the one coming off from like Dawes, and then
Yeah.
you have to kind
Over
of go,
here.
you go east before you can come west. So
Okay.
I mean, I think it's pretty
Sure.
obvious, but when it's a
Yeah.
good opportunity to kind of fix that.
Traffic engineering looked at that, but I think they held off working with Parks on that because of this project coming up.
Yeah,
But
so
they're on
already
it.
on the radar, got it.
Okay. The next one is the Autumn Ridge Path. So what we're looking to do here is to orient you. This is Milwaukee Street here, Highway 30. This is High Stand Ridge Park, and what we're looking to do is continue up the existing path right now, and continue over to this connection, which could link into a neighborhood street, and then another off-street path here on the north side of this subdivision, ultimately connecting with a crossing over Highway 30 and a loop ramp down to Ziegler Road. So this RFP would kind of design all the components in red, and this is a little bit different than the alignment that's shown in MPO bike plan here in orange, where we had looked into that, and the grades here are really steep through that park, and it would take quite a fair amount of trees out through the park. So we're proposing to deviate a little bit about that and get on the street network here for a portion and get back on the alignment here. Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's using the existing ped bike bridge, I think, over that creek kind of further south, right there.
Yes.
So again, probably obvious, but there's no curb cut at where it hits that residential street to the
Right
north,
here.
right there.
Yep.
So
Sure.
getting that added in, and then also just thinking about the crossing treatment then down by Milwaukee.
Right here, yeah, at Portland.
Exactly.
This is Portland Parkway. So kind of the idea here is that Portland Parkway is a pretty nice bikeable street. That also lines up with the crossing of 51. And then, which also lines up pretty nicely with Dawes Street. So if you take a look at our previous map here, Dawes Street ties into this new bridge crossing here. So if you wanted to head up, along Milwaukee Street, along Starkweather Creek, you can kind of go this way. And then if you wanted to head a little further to the east, you can use Dawes, the bridge, Portland Parkway, and this new path that we're proposing, the Autumn Ridge Path. So that's kind of the idea there. We're kind of branching out what used to be called the Goodman Path and kind of branching out off into different neighborhoods. Okay. Next one is Old Middleton Underpass. So right now, here's Old Middleton Road. Just off the screen to the east here is Whitney Way. There's the new University Road development here. And right now, there is an actual underpass under here that is accessible through a stairway that's in the Kanakis Supermarket parking lot. It's pretty unpleasant.
I never knew about that one.
Yeah, it's and it actually does get used. It's a little old stone arch built with the original railroad for stormwater drainage. People use it to walk through. It's about 5 feet tall or so. So the railroad wants to fill that in. We're for structural reasons, we're proposing. We do think that it's a pretty good connection especially from University Row. We have a new path that was installed with that development right here along the western limits of that plat. So we would look to create a new crossing on the other side of the Kanakis Supermarket and kind of tie in with Old Middleton Road and Craig Avenue and this new path that was built in University Row. So it would be a new Fed bike underpass underneath the railroad.
Would you be looking at a precast box for quick construction?
Yes, definitely. For these next two, that would have to be this situation to try to minimize the railroad
You know what you did on the
costs.
on the Wingrove path?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The last one is Troy Drive. Alder Kimball is very aware of this one. The same situation. We got a railroad crossing here. We have an old corrugated metal pipe culvert that was installed that people walk through along the north sidewalk of Troy Drive. It's pretty dark, pretty damp. It doesn't drain very well. So not very inviting for a stroll through that. But what we're hoping to do is design a new ped bike underpass that kind of a more standard width, standard height precast box that we could install hopefully in a few days and try to minimize the railroad disruption. So these are 4 different RFPs that we'd are proposing to issue in the next month. And get started on those projects.
Is the last one, that's just the kind of the pedestrian one? It wouldn't change the road culvert at all, or?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We actually, so changing that's substandard as well.
Right.
However, the cost of that bridge, that railroad bridge, is pretty substantial, and we've kind of pressed the WSDOT to take a look at that. They're basically only focusing on their bridges that are structurally unstable, which this is not. So we also in the past have applied for federal STP urban funds to try to replace that bridge. It didn't score well at all. So we weren't very successful in that effort. So our next thought was, let's at least get the ped bike crossing fixed. Hopefully we can apply for TAP funds if we get this RFP going, get the design going, have a good kind of handle on the costs and of the design. We could either choose to do it with city funds or apply for federal TAP funds.
Maybe in the scenario where we're just doing the sort of ped side, Yang, maybe we could look to put in some markings or signage, even just maybe some sharrows underneath there. It is a spot where traffic moves pretty quickly, and it is so narrow that it might be a good time if we're going to be doing that anyway.
Sure.
Just put in a couple sharrows there and maybe a sign to sort of help people understand you're going to have to slow down and share that space going through for now.
Mm-hmm.
Could I add another comment, probably one up Alder Kemble? Why aren't you considering both sides so we have complete sidewalks in the neighborhood? Once you got it closed for one side, why don't you do the other side at the same time?
We could take a look at that.
So that we can complete the sidewalks on the south side.
Yep, there's certainly an opportunity there.
Did you have the right of way though? I think, isn't there something about the abutment?
The abutment here, you can see,
Goes like
extends
private property.
pretty close to, it'll be tight, no doubt about it.
They can, I think you can deal again with.
We could
Condemning for
certainly take a look at it.
pedestrians.
Obviously, that doubles the cost, but.
Well, you're saving a cost on shut down the railroad, which, so it's not a total doubling.
That's true.
And then also it looks at it, you can look at it differently at sizing of each way, because as a biker, if I'm on street, I'm not going to cross over the street to take that underpass. I'm going to still go on the street.
Yeah.
And that creates a dilemma, is like you create a lot of crossover for a certain amount of bikers, and plus the pedestrians have to cross over on both sides now, even though they might not have wanted to.
Right. Okay.
So just as long as you're looking at it, take a look at the whole picture. You might see some cost savings and you might not have to make the structures quite as wide if you do it on both sides.
Right, we'd have to
Yeah,
extend the sidewalk
Between
here.
there over to Marcy.
Yep, that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Just. Any
Okay.
other comments or questions?
All right,
Good.
the last thing I had for
Oops.
you
Yeah, another one.
was resurfacing. So Chris Dawson came and talked about some of these paths already, but we've added a number of paths. I think you have this list perhaps of the paths. Yep. Basically what we did is we took a look at our bike path ratings, and we're trying to hit all the path links that are rated 5 out of 10, and a couple of extensions of some 6 segments as well, because they're close to the 5 rated segments. So we have Capital City Path, Aberg Avenue Path, Asbury Path, Cooper Lane Path, Glenway Path, and Windgren Creek Path, resurfacing that we'd like to add to the Bikeways project. That's going to the board next week. We have a fair amount of funds in the Bikeways for this resurfacing, so we'd like to hit basically all the paths that are about rated 5, with the exception of the segments of the Southwest Path, which we didn't want to do the same year as Monroe Street. So we'd look to hit those next year.
Okay. Grant?
The Cap City Path, which segment are you looking at?
Let me pull up a quick map here. So I think We're looking here from Jackson to Marquette and the spur from the Cap City Path to St. Paul Avenue. So this stretch here.
Good, and the Winger Creek path?
Yep. It's this one, so we got Orchard to South Park. It's kind of hard to zoom in here, but
Yeah.
this stretch here. And then Olin Turville to Sale Street. Olin Turville Court to Sale Street, so through here.
It must be further east.
So these two segments.
Maybe this?
These two segments are probably
Streets over
will
here,
be
yeah.
in the signature bike routes that we're working on right now. So, yeah, so might be some other improvements come online as well, like intersection improvements that we're working on with engineering for that the whole signature bike route project.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly, like that's by Van Dusen and stuff,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
one? Yeah, and I think I mentioned this to Chris, but the current alignment, I think was, it doesn't actually follow Winger Creek as like the primary, it sort of goes this way and then cuts back, so I don't know if, and maybe it'll be back when that's getting, before it's sort of constructed, but I think realigning that to kind of go along the creek would make more sense, and it would also, it's kind of a blind corner because you're going underneath the railroad culvert there, and it kind of, it comes off to the right before it needs to, so if, it looks like there's a pretty good opportunity to just basically straighten out the Winger Creek path and fix that little jog where it goes over to the side street. So maybe taking a look at that. And then the last comment I had was for the Glenway path. I don't know if it's...
That one's a little short little segment along
just
Speedway.
that bit there?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Could you go back to the capital city on there? I know, I heard you say Jackson to Marquette. What was the other one?
Oh, it was that little spur. St. Paul, the spur here.
Oh, yeah,
So
that
Jackson to Marquette, and then this little spur.
That was originally planned to be part of another project, which never happened, but.
Correct.
A couple comments on that is path width, Jackson to Marquette, long-term should be 12 feet. It's 10 feet right now.
This would only resurface, so it's not.
Well, I'm wondering if you're wasting your money, especially at Ohio Street, which I believe, unless they pulled out of the program, is programmed to be redone with a tabletop crossing. Unless Rob took it out of the program.
Where?
Ohio Street. Ohio Street was supposed to be redone with a tabletop for a bike path. I was going to ask Rob if it was still in the program. He'd put that in along with the Brewerly crossing.
I'll have to check on that.
I'll have to check on it too. I've been meaning to ask them if they're still in.
Yeah, I was actually curious about that as well. The plan calls for a number of table topping through that stretch, so it would be good to know if there's any opportunity, especially with it being closed to, I think Ohio was the one that was sort of first on the list. The other thing though is up by Marquette, this will include the little bit where there's the driveway coming from Kip. And if we can make sure that, because right now it's sort of like that was built into the path, so the concrete Kip path is sort of priority over, and it actually creates some weird water like drainage issues there. So I think this will basically hit right. That's right where that corner is, and so making sure that the path is sort of the smooth grade, and that fixing that stormwater issue right there at that corner would be really important, because that whole thing kind of floods in big rain events.
Any other questions? Great, thanks, Chris, for the update.
All right.
Do we need a resolution on that?
We do not. This is just you guys certainly can.
Pardon? Okay, just wanted to make sure, I didn't want to, okay, thanks very much. Next, we have reports of committees and commissions. Plan Commission, I'll pass on that. Long range? Pardon?
It'll happen on Thursday, and Oliver Whitmore's not here, but we're dealing with the issue of connectivity in the between streets in his neighborhood. So,
Okay, thank you. I should go back to Plan Commission. We had the issue on Seagull between Sheboygan and University, and the issue of ensuring that bike lanes are going to be put in, and that even came up at council, but Plan Commission initiated that, and it carried through in a positive manner, I think. I believe it's going to happen. Joint West Campus?
they're changing the structure of that, and given that we're about to fold, I think that they're waiting for the new board to exist before they do
Okay.
something. But they are meeting tomorrow, and I'll sit in, although unofficially.
Okay, thank you. Joint Southeast?
We haven't met.
Okay. Potential future items, unless there's something new. You see the list in front of you, except one was already been crossed off. We took care of it tonight. And there's an informational enclosure.
Oh, I always do that.
Pardon?
It has the rules and the
Oh,
floor
okay.
plan.
Okay.
What about like recycling?
Pardon?
Recycle update? Been a couple years.
Well, I think we're almost going to let it ride until the next commission forms. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the next meeting is our last meeting. I'm sure you've all heard who the new director of transportation is. The same guy that oversaw the John Nolan project that we approved tonight. Pardon?
I knew his office did, but I didn't know if he did.
Yeah, he's,
So is the chair going to bring cake next month?
no, we're going to get Mr. Dreyer. No, he'll have left town by the time we have the next meeting, I think. Get Mr. Dreyer to bring cake.
There you go.
So, anyway, I'll entertain a motion. Second? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Aaron, I'd like to talk to you about shoulder surgery. I'm not kidding.